serious trouble. So today we're looking at psychosis or schizophrenia. It's probably one of the more harder ones to be able to deal with or understand. So I've got some notes today that we're going to use to help us try and understand that. Now, when I was up in the north of Adelaide, up around Lime, we used to run an early psychosis program. It's one of the best things I've ever seen happen. We used to run it in conjunction with peer specialists, which is people who've experienced mental health problems. We used to involve carers in it as well, and it was about a 7-week program. But by the end of that, people understood what was going on. And then we did get funding further for it, so we're just going to teeth. And even now, there's an early psychosis program that they've tried to get up and running for people, and the government again has actually said no, which is a bit of a sadness for me, because psychosis or schizophrenia usually occurs for people later in their teens, early in their 20s. So, you know, realising that that happens, it would be good to have a program that stops people from having that happen to them. Now, you'll hear the terms psychosis or schizophrenia tossed around a bit. I much prefer the term psychosis. And there's a couple of words I really hate, and if you use them around me, you may find I'm not as receptive to you, because I just don't like them. The first one is schizophrenic. I do not like that term at all. The same as psychotic. I think they're both terms that are very loaded for people, and they tend to identify people as an illness and not as a person first. So if you come up to me and say that person's schizophrenic, you may not like the response you get, simply because, again, it's very loaded. And it comes with a whole lot of kind of images and thoughts around it, and it's never useful. So I usually talk about people experiencing psychosis, or people may experience schizophrenia, but I don't want to diminish the person. But again, you often see news reports and all that kind of stuff, and it talks about this schizophrenic and that kind of stuff. It's loaded with ideas and images that just aren't helpful for people. And it puts them in a box. And again, I'm not a great fan of boxes. So again, you need to be very aware of your language. In fact, I was reading the other day where we have one term to describe what it means to be sane, and that's sane. We have over 2,000 words to describe what it means to have mental illness. So there's a real language imbalance, and we need to be aware of that, especially when we're talking to people around what's going on for them, what's happening for them. So we need to be aware of that kind of language. Now, psychosis, within the mental health field, we'll normally talk about people experiencing psychosis, and they're very reluctant to give people the label of schizophrenia. But they'll use, when people first admit it, they'll talk about people having psychosis. If it continues on for a period of time, say after 6 months, then they'll start talking about people having schizophrenia. So the real term is the psychosis, which is just trying to help not label someone before you need to. But again, I much prefer the term psychosis, and people often then ask me, well, what's psychosis, Mark? And it gives me a chance to explain what that is. Whereas if I use the term schizophrenia, people are already tracking down the road that may not be helpful. So again, I prefer to use that term. And you may need to think about the language you use, because again, it can be very labelling of people and very dismissive of people and who they are and their experience and what they've been through. So you may want to think about that and work that through. The notes I've got today, I've got 3 lots of notes for us to go through. One comes from the early psychosis group that we used to run, and it was by, the nurse that did it was Andrew Fort. He used to work up in the north, but he's since moved down to the south somewhere. Is he still around?
He's still around, yeah.
Is he? Oh,
yep.
Cool. He was really great. But he worked in conjunction with a peer worker to write up these sets of notes. Actually, if you see him again, can you tell I need a new copy of the notes? Because mine are just about worn out.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps he can flick me a copy of them.
Yeah, he's on Global.
He's global, is he?
He's on Global.
Oh, okay.
He's on
I lost track of him for a while, so
yeah.
he was really good.
He was working up our way for a while. So.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind. Sorry, that's an aside. So the notes I've got today have been photocopied and photocopied. So you'll just have to bear with that. And I bought some other notes from a book we're going to use, which I think are important. But let me just talk about a couple of books first. One is Enhancing Recovery from Psychosis. It was written by one of our local psychologists, a guy called Brian Johnson. But I love this book because it's all photocopyable, chapter by chapter by chapter. And it deals with issues around how do we help people to stay well and be well. So again, an excellent little resource. I think you can still get it at Glenside. But again, I found it really useful for people because I can photocopy sections and go through it with people. And so I found it really useful. Although I'm really surprised because this was done by the Mental Health Service, but often they don't go by the recommendations in here, which is really interesting. But anyway, the other book that I found really useful for people is a book called Tell Me I'm Here by Anne Deveson. Do people know Anne Deveson? Her son ended up developing schizophrenia. So it's her story and his story of his journey through his psychosis. But it involves South Australian Victoria, so you get a very good picture of what it's like to experience psychosis and have to live with it and work your way through it, not only as an individual but as families. So again, it has big impact upon families, and often we don't care for the families very well. So again, two of those books I recommend. But first of all, the photocopy notes that have been used and used. So again, you'll have to guess at some of the language, and I apologise about that. There are more coming round. So I did 30 copies, so hopefully there's enough again.
At this stage it should be.
Thank you. Now, as we start this, I actually think, you know, we talk a lot about hearing voices, but I think everyone hears voices in some way, shape or form. That's an interesting thing to think about, but I think we all in some way, shape or form hear voices. For most of us, we can manage those voices, and we can manage them in some way, shape or form. Or for us, they're very good voices and they actually help us to live life and do life well. So who hears from God here? You hear voices. Whether you want to admit it or not, you actually hear voices. And some people don't like that, but I have to acknowledge that I hear voices. God speaks to me. The Holy Spirit speaks to me. I hear that happen inside my head. You know, and I've got a whole group of people that I've known over the years who would speak into my life even though they're not around. Do you have that happen to you? So I've got two chaplains that I've worked with over the years who I love dearly, who were very important for me in my life. I still hear them speaking to me. And it's usually a good thing, apart from when they tell me off because I tried to do something I shouldn't have. But I hear those voices. And I think for a lot of people what happens is those voices tend to break through and start impinging very much on the person's life and how they think and how they operate. Does that make sense? So again, I think it's quite a normal thing that happens. I think it simply becomes kind of distorted or out of proportion for people and starts to take over their lives, and they lose that ability to kind of think about what's actually happening here. And so again, I think that you may not agree with me, that's okay, but I think it's quite normal. Hello, you'll need these before you go. So again, I'm just going to go through some of these notes with you. But the first thing it talks about in those notes is how we make sense of the world, and it begins with our senses. And it says from there, we gather information from our environment using our senses, and they're named there. There's also a couple of other senses they're starting to talk about now. And one is a sense of time and space. There's another way we actually have some of those senses we have in our world where we actually have a sense of space around us and we pick up what's going on in that space. We also have a sense of time, past, present, future, those kinds of things. And people would say that's another kind of sense we have. And so they're starting to incorporate more than just that physical sense, but those other senses around us. It goes on to say that we then begin to try to make sense of the world around us using the ability of our brain to perceive. That's how we apprehend the objects and events around us. We remember, where we record the past and the later refer to it. And then we think. So here I am talking about the ability to ponder or reflect, where we might use such skills as problem solving, reasoning, decision making, spatial thought and abstract thought. We also operate in the world of beliefs. I remember upsetting an atheist just recently. Because he said to me, Mark, I don't believe in God. And I said to him, well, what do you believe in? And he said, oh, I don't believe in God. And I said, well, what do you believe in? What makes your world? What empowers your world? What gives your world life? All those things. He still didn't get it. But we all operate out of belief systems, and often those belief systems are quite cultural to what's going on. If we step outside our culture a bit, we tend to get in a bit of trouble, don't we? Yep, and you'll see that happen to people when their belief systems change. So again, we take this information in and we kind of apprehend it and we interpret it, and then we make kind of meaning of it, we give it purpose and we give it life, and we live our world from there. Does that make sense for people so far? Yeah? So if you go over the page, it talks about what is psychosis. So again, it talks about this idea, it describes a set of disorders in which it's misinterpreted or misapprehension of the information we have around us. So what it's actually saying is psychosis is actually a misinterpretation or a misapprehension of the things that are happening either around us or in us, or people around us. So again, you know how we talked about mood disorders? And mood disorders were mainly around mood and how that affects us. Well, this is around our thinking and how that affects us. And so again, you'll find for people that start developing psychosis, they start to misinterpret or misapprehend what's going around them. The other problem for a lot of people who experience psychosis is they lose the ability of insight. Now that happens in most of the mental health stuff, but it happens especially in this. And people will start to lose insight. Do people know what I mean by insight? Okay. Sorry?
Can you clarify a bit more? Like, I think I know what you mean, but I don't know if I know what you mean.
That's all right. Tell me what you think it is.
Well, I consider insight the ability to reflect on something and come to in-depth conclusions.
That's right. Yeah. That's insight. Tell what's right and wrong. Yeah. Insight's really important, by the way. If you don't have insight, your life is not going to go well. Insight is that ability, you're right, to stand back, almost stand outside of ourselves at times and look at what's going on and what's happening around us. And then to be able to use our reason, our logic, our emotions, our experience, and people around us to help understand what's going on.
Perspective.
Yeah. And we need it. We need it a lot in order to be well and do well. But for people who experience psychosis stuff, that starts to disappear. And so they start to lose the balance of even that. And so you can see where those distortions start having more power or control over the person's life. Does that make sense for people? But again, you'll see it happen and you'll see it go on in people. And even last week I was sitting in one of my mental health units and I'm sitting there and this person is telling me stuff. And my thought in my head was, you're really believing this. That they've lost the ability for insight to stand back and look and think, oh, don't know whether that's even culturally appropriate for me to say. All that had kind of gone.
And is it that they lose the ability to listen to other people, like if people are trying to speak into what they're
Well, the
saying?
other thing that happens, and we'll talk about that as we go along, is this mistrust stuff that happens.
Yeah.
Because you start to lose your boundaries and they start to kind of get fractured and disintegrated, so you lose the ability to trust others. I mean, in medical terms or mental health terms, they call it paranoia,
Yeah.
but I tend to talk about mistrust. That seems to be a better term for me. Paranoia has some kind of other terms for me that I don't particularly appreciate, but they tend to mistrust and mistrust people. And so you can imagine how frightening that is to start with. So when you're working with people or standing alongside people that have psychosis, you really need to build up the trust stuff. So that when things don't go so well, people can actually hear what you're saying, even through the mistrust and all those things that are going on. Does that make sense for people? So again, there's a whole lot of things that can happen for people, and it's being aware of that and helping people to work through that. So it goes on to say in the notes, for the person experiencing psychosis, it may mean that the way the individual mind makes sense of the world can be distorted or fragmented, and you'll see for a lot of people there's this fragmentation that takes place. And they talk about a lot of words that can happen for people, but they talk about people having hallucinations, which is this idea about believing or thinking things that just aren't based in our kind of reality. People can have delusions. And now delusions are often based in some form of reality, but they're distorted or misapprehended. So I worked with a lady a while ago who, the stressor she came in with was that she'd actually had an argument with neighbours. Who's not had an argument with neighbours? Who perhaps doesn't talk to their neighbours? But she'd had an argument with her neighbours, and she gradually got more and more unwell and started believing that they were after her, and that they could read her mind through the radio, TV, that kind of stuff. That's delusions. Does that make sense? So hallucinations are normally not based in reality. Delusions have some form of reality, but it's been distorted. People can have lots of thought disorder, so they can have disorganised or confused thinking. And again, I've got a lady at the moment who would take probably 4 minutes to answer me if I asked her a question. Her thinking is just so slowed down because of what's going on that it's hard for her to process information and to be able to talk about it and work it through. So again, and thinking can just get scattered and thrown all over the place. People can also get changes in mood, they can get loss of motivation, and they can also get very poor concentration. So again, if I'm working with people who are experiencing this stuff, I'm never going to say we've got to do this, this and this and this. I can't assume that they're going to pick that up. So for me, it's one idea at a time, one thought at a time often.
I read that you can have some of these things, but never experience them again. Like,
Yep.
happen for a bit, but then if it goes longer than 6 months, then it's schizophrenia.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And that would be right. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But so again, people can experience this stuff, and for some people, they'll only ever get one bout of this. You know, that's the reality. For some people, they'll only get one bout of this, maybe due to a high load of stress, perhaps some drug use, perhaps not managing life well, those kinds of things that we've talked about. Remember the stress model? And then they learn, you know, the stress is resolved, they learn how to manage life, and they may only ever have one episode. For some people, they'll have 2 or 3 episodes, 4 episodes perhaps. And for some people, again, they'll be left with this, with the voices and stuff running in their heads. And that's about 25% of people.
Of all people?
For people who experience schizophrenia. There's about 25% of people who'll be left with the kind of the residue of having to hear voices and those kinds of things on a regular basis. It's quite high. One of the best things I really like at the moment, and it's not something we've picked up in South Australia, and I do not know why, is the hearing voices movement. It's very strong within Victoria and other places, but there is now a recognition that there are a lot of people who are going to live with this stuff. And people can learn to live with it and learn to live with it well. It doesn't have to continue to be a problem that they kind of just runs over their world all the time, but it can actually be something that they can learn to manage and work with well. But we don't particularly run it here. And it's the Hearing Voices Network. If you get a chance to do any reading on it, stuff like that, Victoria does it really well. They've got a group up and running at the moment, and I went to a conference 2 or 3 years ago, and they were running a conference on the Hearing Voices Network. And they had, expert people come along to talk about it, but they also had people that experienced this stuff talking about how did they manage it. And so again, for a lot of people, it's learning to manage it and work their way through it. So again, if you get a chance to look at any of the Hearing Voices Network stuff, it's a good read. Because again, some people will be left with it and will have to manage it, but again, they can do it really well and live well in the whole process. But again, it's worth thinking about. But again, if you get the chance, I would say it's worth looking at. But again, I don't know why we haven't picked it up here. We tried to start one, just fell in a hole. I'm not particularly happy about South Australia at times and the way it does things, but it really hasn't picked that up and run with it. But it does work very effectively for people and with people. Again, if we go over the page, and again, psychosis is a human experience. And again, we've talked about this, but again, all of us, like I've said, if I took all of you now and I loaded you into a van and for 3 days made you work, no sleep, you'd all be showing signs and symptoms of psychosis. Yep. In some way, shape or form, you'd all be showing it. It wouldn't take much, actually. It's really scary when you think about it. But again, it wouldn't take much. So it's just talking about that this can happen to us and it can be part of our human experience. Now, if you go over the page, it talks about psychosis and what they call prodrome or prodromal. Now this, and it'll talk about it in the notes as well, but I like to do this bit now. But what often happens for people is they start misinterpreting, they start misapprehending, they may start seeing things out the corner of their eye. They may start hearing voices that are more derogatory, all those kinds of things, until eventually they get to a full-blown acute phase, and then there's the recovery phase. And they call this prodromal. I don't know why, but you may, I don't. What they found is if you can actually get to people here, you'll stop this. You can actually stop the acute phase from happening. Now that's really important, because if you can actually stop this from happening, you'll actually help people to be well and stay well and to do really well. Because they say if you have your first bout of psychosis, and I've told you this before, it takes at least a year to recover. If you have another 2 or 3 bouts, it's going to take 3 to 5 years to recover. It's long haul stuff for people to get better. So actually helping people to be well and stay well here is really important. It's also important to help them in their recovery, because I think what happens to a lot of people is they get well, they get the acute phase, they start to recover, and then guess what? They'll dip back down again. And if we can actually help people, we can actually help them to stay up instead of going down again. Does that make sense?
And does that help medication?
Yeah.
Yep.
A lot of it, yeah. People will use medications, and there are a lot of medications around. There's also a lot of side effects. And unfortunately for a lot of people, especially with the psychosis stuff, the antipsychotic medications they talk about, you're really going to experience the side effects before you experience the effects. These ones especially. So again, helping people to work through that, to get through that is really important. Helping them to understand the side effects of medication is really important. But it does help them to deal with and manage so that they can stay here and not down here. Does that make sense?
Would rest help them?
Oh, yes. Yep, but that again, we'll talk about some of that in a minute, but again, it's really important to realise, and that's some of the stuff I'm going to talk about later, there's a couple of things I do with people when I'm working with them, and I want to understand what's going on for them so I can actually work with them, because the last thing I want them to do is come down here and then come up here and then bounce down again, and then go back up, and then, you know, that's the last thing you want to see for people. So again, for me, it's really important that we recognise this stage for people. Even after they've had their first bout, we still need to recognise that they could go back down again, and we need to make sure they're going to do well and be well. Does that make sense? So again, really important. So in that prodromal phase, like I've said in the notes, it starts to get to the point where no one understands what you say. Your friends are often confused or argue with what you say. So again, you'll have people starting to kind of arc up a bit. Your family can start believing other things that you don't believe in. Suddenly fundamental beliefs about life are challenged. What is important is what is not. But again, you can see this slowly start happening for people. The other problem is for a lot of times people just saying, oh, they're being difficult kids. And they may not be difficult kids at all. It may be that there's some stuff going on that hasn't been picked up. And again, I've worked with a young lady for a number of years. And she knew that this was happening, but didn't get any help and couldn't get any help. Wasn't listened to. I think she was about 14. When this started. So it can start quite early. It can actually, the prodromal phase can actually happen over a period of years, or even a period of weeks, or even a period of days.
And how do you know it's this prodromal rather than maybe depression or anxiety? Like,
Well, for me it wouldn't matter. It would be
Right.
understanding that this is not just normal teenage kind of angst stuff going on. So for me, it's asking questions so that I can understand what's going on for them, and not assuming that I know what's going on and that they're just being difficult kids. So for me, it's asking the kind of questions about what's going on for you, what's happening in your life at the moment. Are there some issues that you're not coping or managing with? Are there some stresses that have happened lately? What's been going on for you? But it's asking those questions that's really important. And again, we don't often stop to ask those questions. And so again, when I'm working with a lot of young people, I'm going to ask those questions. Because I can't just assume that they're just, you know, not dealing with life at the moment and, you know, they're going through that normal teenage stuff, because they may not. But again, this young lady, she started hearing things. She started seeing things out the corner of her eye. Her grades started going down. And that was simply because she couldn't concentrate. You know, her head just kind of went in all other directions because she started hearing things, that kind of stuff. Does that make sense for people? But again, you know, it's really important that we pick up on those things and those kinds of things. But again, that's the prodromal phase, so you may hear about that. And again, the acute stuff is usually where people end up in hospital. And trying to go to bed and all those kinds of things. If you go over the page, it talks about the 3 phases of psychosis. So it talks about, again, we've talked about the prodromal phase, and we've talked about it can have changes in mood, it can have changes in thinking, and people will start to get those physical or perceptual changes. And again, worth keeping an eye on. And again, there's over the page again is a list of some of those prodromal early signs for people. And then it talks about getting some help. So again, if we actually see this happening and we're able to get people help, we're going to decrease the immediate risk to self and to others. We're going to decrease the likelihood of long-term disability. And again, there's lots of stuff to say that if you keep having these acute phases, it will actually affect your brain and damage your brain. So again, being aware of that's really important, but you can actually, the more we get aware, the better we do it, the less problems there are for a person getting a really damaged brain from it. We can actually decrease the likelihood of relapse, and for me that's really important. So I may not be able to pick up on this for the first time with someone, but if I can decrease the relapse, you're on a winner. You are on a winner for this person. So again, working with people who do have this, again, if you decrease the possibility of relapse, again, you decrease the possibility of very long-term effects for people. And it's really important that we help people to do that. Minimising distress for the person and their family, maintaining social connections. Again, the person can actually feel connected, you're going to keep more of that insight going. And again, that's really important for people that they don't lose the insight. Once insight goes, you're in serious trouble. Because you've no longer got any way of balancing what's going on for you. No idea of working it out. And again, talking about the improving long-term outcomes. And again, for me, I use Headspace a lot. So if I'm working with young people, and I know this is going, Headspace for me is always one of the first places I go to. I found them to be a very good organisation set up specifically for young people, and they did have the early psychosis program running, but the government in its wisdom decided it was no longer viable. And I don't know whose butt I'd like to kick, but I'd like to kick someone's butt over it because I don't think it's very healthy at all. But again, I will always use Headspace as a resource. They are very useful, very helpful. If I'm working with someone and they want me to go with them, I'll go with them to Headspace. And again, that's a way of both of us staying on the same page about what's going on, what's happening. And again, if we can catch people here, often we'll help them to make better life choices about where they want to go for education, training, all those kinds of things. They're less likely to drop out, less likely to fail. Does that make sense for people? So again, really important stuff. If you go over the page, it talks about the active phase of psychosis. So we're starting to talk about this, where the person kind of just hits rock bottom and often find themselves in a mental health unit somewhere. And so, it's probably not a good place for some of our people to be, being in a mental health unit. Some of them aren't good, in that they're around people who have been in the system for a long time, so they start to learn things that are not helpful for them, and learn how to manipulate this, do all that kind of stuff. So you'll find they'll often talk about positive and negative symptoms of psychosis. And positive, simply when they talk about positive, it's been added to the person. Negative symptoms, taken away from the person. So you may hear them talk about positive and negative symptoms. So again, some of the positive symptoms are listed there, like delusions, which are those distorted beliefs. And it starts talking about kind of getting a bit more nitty-gritty. So persecution, that people are plotting against them, that they're being victimised by someone. People can have reference ideas, and that's that idea that objects have special or personal messages. And again, I was working with someone just recently who was hearing stuff from the TV. These special messages were coming to them from the TV. Grandiosity, which is the idea that they've got special powers, special abilities to be able to do things. Control and influence, being controlled or influenced by others, that's another kind of form of delusion. People can have hallucinations, so again, auditory, the voices stuff. And again, you've got to think about this, because for a lot of people it's really distressing. Can you imagine if you were hearing a voice and it was derogatory about you or about the world or whatever it was, going off in your head most of the time? That would be pretty distressing. There's no more balance there for the person. People can see things. So again, I have one lady I work with who would see blood coming down walls. All that kind of stuff. They would see those kinds of things. Cymatics, so that's having something inside your body. So again, I've had people who say, Mark, I've got these spiders crawling through my skin. And it's real for them. And they can actually feel it. For some people, they'll get tactile, that's that burning, olfactory, like smells. Like one lady we had, that there was, can't you smell the gas coming through the vent? Again, it's real for them. Again, it's happening. Food or drink can taste strange. You know, even for some of my people, they'll start getting auras. I can tell when they're starting to get really unwell, they'll get these auras. Colours will change in perception. And they'll start picking up these kind of auras around them. So, you know, their world just kind of just goes right out of whack. And those things that you just consider normal, safe, part of your world just kind of goes poof. So again, keep in mind that for a lot of people, it can be really distressing. And that's why, again, we've got to be really careful with our body language stuff and how we use our body language with people who've got this kind of stuff going. Because you can frighten them without you even realising it. I mean, I've got one lady I work with, I don't wear a certain deodorant because it reminds her of something, or it triggers something, or it sets her off, that kind of stuff. If I'm working with people and I know they're unwell or, you know, battling with it, my communication starts here, so that by the time I get to them, you know, from about here, they're okay. I'm aware of not coming up behind them, doing all that kind of stuff. I'm aware that I don't make jokes. Normally I just joke and I have fun and I muck around, but with some people I'm not going to make jokes because they won't pick it up. Or if they do pick it up, they'll misinterpret it or misapprehend it. With some people I know that I really need to debrief anything before I see them. Because they'll pick it up and they'll misapprehend it or misinterpret it and pick it up in a way that's not good. So again, I had this happen to, I don't know if I've told, but I had this happen to me a while ago. Someone came up to me before I went to my mental health unit that I was working at, and they said to me, Mark, I'm going to come in and I'm going to work with you and I'm going to see all those people saved. Now that just lit my fuse. Oh no, lit it big time, because there was no one knowing I was going to have someone come in with that agenda. If you told me, Mark, I really want to love these people and understand what's going on, and I want to share the gospel with people, I'm more than happy with that. But this person came in with their own agenda, and they would have tipped the world upside down, and I would have been dealing with it for a number of weeks. So my fuse just lit up. I was ready to hit this guy. My fist was clenched. And normally I'm a pretty patient guy. But this time I was really ready to kind of, you know, if I had got a chance, I probably would have got a hook in at him if he had kept going. But it got to a point where I said, we're not talking about this anymore. Go and talk to my boss. And I went to go into one of my units, and I went to shake hands with someone, and I'd known them for a long time, hadn't debriefed. And they said, you don't like me, do you? But I had all that baggage that was coming with me, and they misinterpreted or misapprehended it. Does that make sense for people? So if you're working around people who've got psychosis stuff on, you need to be quite aware of your body language stuff, how it affects them, those kinds of things. You're going to need to go back and apologise at some stage because you're going to stuff it up like I did. But at least you can go back and apologise and then build the relationship from there. Does that make sense for people? And again, people are very, you know, mistrusting, stuff's happening for them, they're trying to manage, and we can bowl in and not even realise what's going on, and suddenly it flares or what happens. So again, you need to be aware of your body language and that kind of stuff, so that you can best help people to deal with it. Again, even sitting in front of someone, I will not do that. I won't even stand in front of someone if they've got, and I know they've got psychosis stuff going. I'm not going to be that confrontational stuff going, because they'll pick it up like that. Can pick it up as a threat, and you can, you know. So again, you've got to think about those things and be aware of them. And if you are, you'll actually build that trust, and that will help that person to be able to do that. Again, you need to debrief any stuff you've got, because they will pick it up and misapprehend it. It's like their radar gets turned up. And, you know, normally we pick up body language anyway. And I think they say that within the first 4 seconds of meeting someone, you've decided what they're like. That's the way it is. Whether you like them or don't like them, you've decided within the first 4 seconds of seeing someone whether you like them. So with the person who's got this stuff running, you can imagine that they're picking up all kinds of stuff, and it may not be the best things for them. So again, if it goes on to say some of the other stuff, so people can get disorganised thinking and speech. They can have what they call loose associations, which is jumping from one topic to another without a clear connection. And sometimes you can just feel like you're jumping train tracks all the time, from one thing to another. And sometimes you need to just sit with that and allow it to happen. Because if you try and miscorrect that person, so they're not even going to see that. Sometimes it's just better just to allow it to run until the person is actually feeling better and feeling well. Again, if you jump in too early, you're going to give them a message that says, perhaps I won't even say what it is, but again, you'll give them a message. So again, you need to be aware of that. People can also get things like, again, perservations it talks about, which is repeating words or statements. They can get particular verbal expressions, or even neologisms, which is made up words. So you can have people making up words on you, which is always an interesting thing to happen. But again, their ability to think, reason, it's all being misinterpreted, misapprehended. So again, sometimes for me I need to fill the spaces in as well for people. So, and then people know that I'm on the same page and I'm looking to help them to understand what's going on. But you'll hear all kinds of stuff. Now it talks about the negative symptoms, and I think this is why it takes people so long to recover for the negative symptoms. So people can get poverty of speech. They can say a lot with little content or meaning, and it'll just ramble on and on and on. And again, that's maybe something you sit with for a while. People can get blunted or flat affect. So it's this lack of emotional responsiveness. So I've had people come up to me and they're actually smiling at me and they're telling me this terrible story. That's a blunted affect. They're just not able to connect the thinking and the emotion together to tell the story. Does that make sense? And you'll think, wow, what's going on there? But that's what's happening. They've got this blunted affect stuff. So their emotions and their thinking are no longer working well together. And you'll hear that and you'll see that, and you need to be aware of that.
Is that because the brain's not functioning?
Yeah, it's just got scattered.
Is that the front part of the brain?
Front part of your brain is the logical part of your brain, yeah?
Yeah.
But there's some disconnect there somewhere between the emotions, and so people will get disturbances in motivation. So again, often their motivation just goes right out the window. And it can take a long time for people to actually recover from that. So again, I've worked with people and they come and tell me it's the best thing they've done is they've had a shower for the first time in a week. But for them, that was a really big thing to do. So again, their motivation just it's like someone just chucks it out the window and they find it hard to recover and to get going again. People can have emotional and social withdrawal, so lack of interest in recreation and people, and they can get preoccupied with their own ideas and their own fantasies. So it's like they get locked up in their own little world. And sometimes it can be hard to work with people and get with people. But even with some of my people I work with, it will be simply, let's go for a walk today. So instead of going for coffee, we may go for a walk. But it actually helps to get them out, to get them motivated, and perhaps to be in a different environment where we can actually simply talk and do those kinds of things. With some of my people, I don't take them to noisy environments. So if you're going to invite someone out for coffee, do not take them to Cafe Primo or somewhere like that where the noise just bounces everywhere and is all over the place. Because again, their ability to concentrate pulls straight out the window, and they're probably going to be noise sensitive. So again, if you're going to do things with people, make sure you pick environments that are quite calming and quiet. So I know down where I work at the moment, I know I've got a couple of cafes where we can go, and if people want to sit and smoke, they can actually sit outside and smoke and have their coffee. And we'll sit in such a way that the smoke blows away from me, but we can sit and have coffee, and I know that's a safe environment. And there's some other places I know we can go where we can go inside and have coffee, but it's not around here. And sound doesn't bounce around. So you've got to keep those things in mind. And if I'm in a church environment and I know that person has trouble, we go off to somewhere else. Move away from the noise and the hubbub and that kind of stuff. And it's simply to get people away so they've got the opportunity to attend on what's happening, because they will find it hard to do often. And again, people will also have attention problems, so their ability to attend, to stay connected, will get diminished. So with some people I know, if I've done 5 minutes with them, I've done really well. And they've done really well. But their ability to attend can be really critical to kind of conversations you have. And you need to keep an eye on what's happening to them so that if you see the fade happening, you can say, well, it's probably time for me to go, and it's been good catching up with you, and I'll catch up with you later. But again, if you keep pushing, you're going to give them a message that says, what are you going to give them a message on?
Feel threatened, wouldn't you?
Feel threatened, yeah.
Maybe that you've got an agenda and you have to get
Yeah,
through it.
you have to get it over. Yeah. Can you hear that kind of stuff? So you need to be aware of that kind of stuff. Yeah? Now, if you go over the page, it talks about the different types of psychosis. Have a read if you want. But again, you'll see there's listed there all the kinds of psychosis they talk about for people. And again, it'll give you some kind of idea of what's happening. Again, the one that I'm often more aware of for a lot of people is the schizoaffective disorder. And that's where you get the double whammy. So not only do you get the psychosis going, but you can also get the mood disorder stuff going. So you can imagine someone who's really lifted high on a mood and then they've got psychosis going. Things can, ramp out of control very quickly for them when they've got that kind of stuff going. But again, it'll just help you to be aware of if you hear those kinds of terms. I don't tend to use them a lot with people. I don't tend to use them a lot with people, and you'll see why in a little while. Again, if you keep going over the page, you'll see again that stress model of why people develop the kind of mental health problems they do. And again, it's just a model that is often used a lot. Now, the recovery stuff, and again, I've talked about this before. It says recovery from psychosis may vary greatly from one individual to another. Sorry, I should have I've never, these are not my notes, so I don't have page numbers on them. Recovery may occur rapidly with a quick return to normal lifestyle, and for some of our people that come in, they'll develop drug-induced psychosis, and we know that after 5 days, when the drug's out of their system, they'll be okay. Whether they're going to do well is another question. But we know after 5 days the drugs will be out of their system and they'll be back to kind of thinking, processing normal. Whether they're going to make changes to their lifestyle so that they don't bounce back will be another question. But again, others may take weeks or months to get back on track, and for many, 25% their first episode of psychosis will be their last. About 25% may experience a few episodes. And then it goes on to say around 50% may remain vulnerable to a relapse. That's high. That's quite high. And I don't think those stats have changed.
Does it matter which, like you said, 5 days the drug will be in the system? Does it matter whether it's
Not usually. No, usually it's about 5 days. Yeah. So again, the idea of recovery is really important. And maintaining recovery is really important. And the more we can help people to maintain the recovery, the better they're going to do. And that's really important, that idea of recovery, keeping a person kind of moving in recovery is actually one of the most important things that we can do for people. And, it can be really simple stuff like helping them to maintain community. I've got some people I will see once a week. And I sometimes wonder what I'm doing. Have you ever felt like that? But you know, that once a week is actually enough for them to know that I care, and that I've blocked out a specific amount of time, and that I will spend that time with them, and I'll take the time to care and to be available. But for them, that may be enough to actually keep them going and doing the things they need to do. Does that make sense? So again, it may not be, you know, it's not rocket science, is what I'm saying. It can be very simple things. You know, with one person I work with, and I've been working with her for a while, it's simply kind of helping her to understand some of her theology. Because when she got unwell, her theology just went through the ceiling, and she came back with all these ideas around who is God and how does the universe operate and all those kinds of things. And so for her, I act as an anchor point to talk about those things. And so she'll know, she can come and talk to me and say, Mark, I've been thinking about this. And we'll talk that through. But for her, that's simple enough to be able for her to grab that, and I act as that kind of insight point. Does that make sense? You know, for some people, I work with, it's simply that they can come to church once a week. And it may be they come in late and they go early, because they don't want to do all that handshaking stuff and getting to know people. But for them, they do that, and it helps them to maintain what's going on for them. So it can be really quite simple stuff, but it helps them to be able to do that. The other thing is that I keep, you know, very clear in my head is about believing in them. Looking for the opportunities that would help them to grow and develop as people. Looking to encourage them in the things they do. And again, that's really important for people to understand and know that they still have meaning and purpose in this world. And unfortunately, because they have the overlay of the illness and all that that means, it means often people are very labelled with stuff instead of being seen as children of God. So again, helping them to be able to do that's really important, and for them to be able to do that. And again, it's a lovely thing to be able to do that. So again, one of my people, 2 or 3 weeks ago, her dad died. It's been coming for a while. But she actually didn't get unwell and didn't go into hospital. So she did really well. And so for me, part of our meeting and having coffee was saying, how have you done this? You know, you've had this stuff happen to you. How have you done this? What's made it possible for you to be able to stand here and be here with me today and have this conversation with me? And she was able to explain that. So again, it's this encouraging, you know, mentoring, doing that kind of stuff that's really important. Yeah? So again, recovery is really important. Now, there are some tips here for relating well with a person who's experiencing psychosis. So this was written by a guy called Paul, who's actually a peer worker, or he was a peer worker within the mental health system, but he burned out. One of the problems with it's a real issue with peer workers. People who've had mental health problems and who are now used within the mental health system, often they're not taught how to use their story well. And people often push them to tell too much of their story that they're not ready to tell or not ready to be involved in, and it just devastates them when that happens. So again, part of the system is we don't do that well. So he's actually written out some tips for relating well. So again, I trust his kind of thinking around that. So he's got some ideas about that kind of stuff, and I'll, again, get you to take them and read them, how to think through them. But again, really important kind of stuff that actually helps people to manage what's going on for them. But again, helps you to manage as well. And again, that's really important. So I'll get you to have a read of those. But we're going to have a break now because it's 3 o'clock. So we'll come back in 10 minutes. And then we're going to use
That would be good.
Okay, has everyone got a copy? No, it's still coming. Okay. Yeah, they got the notes. They got the notes. Movie rights are coming out. Alright, so the first lot of notes I've given you is about understanding early warning signs. Now, I do this with a lot of the people I work with because I realise two things. One is if I can get them to recognise early warning signs and actually agree with them about what their early warning signs are, and if they give me permission to talk about those early warning signs, we're going to stop them from getting into unwellness. The second thing is it actually stops me looking at them trying to think, when are they getting unwell? Now, for a lot of people, their greatest anxiety, for a lot of people I've worked with, is their carers, friends, always looking at them like they're getting unwell. And I've actually worked with families as well with this stuff, because what I want them to do is to pick up the early warning signs, not the unwellness signs. Does that make sense for people? So it's really helping people to understand their early warning signs, and then to help them to be able to write them down, name them, give me permission to name them, and sometimes I'll even say, this is what I've noticed when you're starting to get stressed. So I'm not even going to talk to them about getting unwell. I start talking to them about what is I've noticed about what makes you stressed. And I'll get people to give me permission to name them. Because a lot of the time they're not going to see them. They're not going to even be able to know what's going on. And those early warning signs can be really simple things. So for one of the ladies I work with, and she gave me permission a long time ago, her early warning signs are she loses an hour's sleep a night, her room starts to get messy, and she'll eat out the fridge. They're her early warning signs. And she gave me permission to be able to name those with her. So and now I can simply say, how are your early warning signs going? And she can name them, and she say, actually Mark, you're right. I've just noticed I've started losing an hour's sleep in my room. Normally, apparently her room is like, you could eat off the carpet, kind of clean. But that's her early warning signs. And for her, it means then we can start talking about what are the stresses that are here for you. And it means we can start problem solving, doing all that kind of stuff. So she's actually dealt with it, so she's not getting unwell. Does that make sense?
Do you actually start with the stress? Because stress can actually sometimes lead you to become physically sick.
Physically sick, and unwell, mental health wise, it can lead you to be that way as well. We're all the same, by the way.
I mean, can it be like how all this stuff starts? You say like environmental factors, like stress or whatever. Can it be like other things as well? Like a combination of
It can be a combination of things. So this lady I work with, it could be that her mum and her aren't getting on at the moment. Or it could be there's some financial stresses going on, or it could be because for her she's always wanted to get back to work, but she's not quite ready to get back to work, so kind of expectation stuff going on as well.
It would have to be like full on stuff though, for you to start hearing voices and stuff.
You'll start hearing voices if you don't deal with it early enough. That's the model I'm suggesting. So the model I'm suggesting it'll be the same for anyone. We get stressed and our bodies pick up signs of stress. So, if you pick up that you're starting to get stressed here at 0, 1 or 2, it's far easier to pick up there than when it's 10, 9, 8 or even 11. By the time you're up to 10 or 9 or 8, for a lot of people, They're starting to show signs of hallucinations, delusion, thought disorder, all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense, better sense for people? And you'll have all these ones in between as well. But I really want to be able to pick up this with people instead of waiting to get here. Because it's so far easier for them and it's far easier for me too. It makes life easier.
Is that because people just make themselves get to a 10, or they just try to ignore it, or they don't get help quick enough and they end up at 10?
Yeah, all of that. We're all a bit like that too, by the way. Oh no, all of us are like that, aren't we?
Yeah.
You know, we don't like to talk about things, you know, we don't like to tell what's going on. We maybe feel a bit embarrassed or a bit ashamed that we're not managing, not doing so well. All those things go on for people, don't they? But again, for me, my whole aim is if I can pick it up here, I'm going to stop that relapse stuff. And that's what I want to be able to do, is stop the relapse stuff. And I also want to have to be so on vigilant looking for this stuff that I'm actually blowing the relationship with the person. Does that make sense for people? So again, it's a different model to work with people, but it's talking about stress, not about unwellness. Because again, once you're up here, and there's nothing you can do. Nothing you can do. And so again, it's really important for us to be able to recognise that this is really important for people. Picking that up, starting to put things in place that people can do so that they can actually work their way through it.
What about if you can see someone that they're sort of probably around the 4,
Yeah.
and they're just not wanting to hear, maybe they need to ease up a bit, or, the stress level is not sustainable, that sort of thing.
Yeah. With a lot of my people, I use that motivational interviewing stuff. You know, we talked about the motivational interviewing. I'll hammer that stuff. And I'll start saying to them, look, I've noticed that this is happening for you. And I'm really concerned, because if this happens, this is what's going to happen. And, if you don't do something about it, this is what will happen. And I much prefer to see you doing this and start pushing it that way. So I'll go back and use all that motivational interviewing stuff we talked about. And again, really good tool to help people to shift or move or change. Yeah.
Is there much difference between men and women?
No. No. Unfortunately, no. I'm not being rude. Sometimes women will have a better social network. So they'll have a better social network. But when people are being really unwell, they'll lose the social network. So you're kind of back at square one for a whole bunch of people. Yeah. So again, people got that idea in their head. It's about talking about stress, not about unwellness. And again, if you're always talking to people about unwellness, they're going to come eventually and give you a clip under the ear and say, what are you talking about? I'm not really happy for this to happen. Thanks very much. So again, it's really important. And again, picking it up here is fine, and you'll be the same too. Picking up your stress stuff is really important. So do you know what your signs are when you start to get stressed at 1 or 2? What are your signs? What are your signs that you start to get stressed at 1 or 2?
I get bothered by the radio going, say, in the car, and I almost get palpitations. So I'm like, oh, I've got to just completely...
That's probably getting up to 4 or 5. Oh no, that's quite high. That you're starting to move up. If you talk about palpitations, that's panic.
Okay.
Yeah. So you may need to think about what it is for you. What about?
Yeah, just getting irritated.
Irritated? Annoyed? Yeah. What about for you?
Never really thought about it. Probably.
She's not old enough.
Maybe not getting enough sleep.
Not getting enough sleep. Yeah.
Negative self-talk.
Negative self-talk. So you may go and do something and it doesn't work, and you start pounding yourself around here. Appetite. What do you do? Eat too much or not eat? Not eat. Yeah.
Yes.
Negative self-talk.
Negative self-talk.
Short with the children.
Short with the children. Yeah. or kick the dog, whichever.
Probably shallowness of breath, so not
Okay.
no deep breathing.
Yeah,
So
but
fine.
again, see, I would say that's up
It's getting
here.
up. Yeah,
I would say that's up here. There
probably a
needs
little
to
bit
be
of irritation before that.
a little bit of
Yeah,
irritation.
yes.
Yeah. What about for you?
Oh, I get very annoyed when I hear loud music.
Loud music. So you start getting noise sensitive. Yeah.
I can't watch any violence or horror, those sort of movies. That really gets
Yeah.
to me
That may be up here. What about down here?
every day.
Okay. It's worth thinking about because in order to actually be able to teach people, you've got to name your own stuff. Yeah. And you help people to be able to work through it by naming your own stuff.
You're waking up early and not being able to calm my mind.
Okay. Yep. So waking up early. Yep.
Yes, it would be lack of concentration.
Lack of concentration. Yep.
Problem sleeping.
Sleeping. Yep. Yep.
Pre-niggerness.
Sorry.
Pre-niggerness.
What does that mean?
Start to get a migraine.
Oh, okay, yeah. Can you hear that? And some of my people who do get migraines get auras beforehand. So again, for them that will
Can you
be
say what's an aura?
an aura. They'll start to get this sense of light and colours around them.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah,
When they're awake.
when they're awake. Yeah.
Just
And
around
it's-
themselves.
Yeah.
not up there.
Yeah.
Usually get stomach.
Stomach.
Yeah.
Can't eat. Okay. Yeah.
Sleep issues.
Sleep.
Yeah. Sleep, comfort eating, and a skin rash. Like
Skin rash. Yeah. Okay. So that psoriasis may be more up here. Yep. Carol.
Yeah, sleep and comfort eating. I want to and I can't, which makes it even worse.
Yeah. Okay.
Staying up
Staying up late. Yeah. What about for you?
Clenching my teeth, getting really irritated
Yeah,
very easily.
okay, so teeth grinder, yep.
Annoyed and tearful.
Annoyed and tearful, yeah.
lack of sleep, getting panicky,
Mhm.
sometimes teary.
Yeah,
This is a practical thing, no time to do the housework.
okay, so you get a bit over busy, yep.
Not wanting to do anything.
Yeah, okay, yep. I've had enough, I just want to shut the doors, thanks very much.
Yeah, a bit of that, and also, just not being able to sleep.
And for you?
Not finishing anything.
Not finishing? Yep, okay. Now, what about 5 or 6? 5 or 6? You're getting to panic, we can hear that, yeah?
Start making up like things in my head that I want to say to people.
Yeah, so there may be some conflict and you're starting to kind of deal, yeah? Okay. Yeah? So the stress is starting to climb.
I think I start going into a panic.
Okay, so you may start getting
Yeah,
a
shortness of breath.
shortness of breath, yeah?
Mhm.
I don't know, some sort of comfort behaviour.
Alright, okay, alright.
Whatever I want.
Wanting to run away. Can you hear the panic starting to set in? Yeah.
I withdraw and get anxious.
Okay, so the withdrawing again is, yep.
Wine.
Wine, yep.
Are we drinking it or are we whining?
I'd say agitation.
Agitation, yeah.
But
So
yeah, it helps.
wanting to
tension
solve
that.
it but can't solve
Yeah,
it,
that's
yeah.
right.
Yep.
Lack of sleep.
Lack of sleep, yeah.
Yeah, same thing. I was just thinking those stressors in your life. Say you lost a partner and then you moved house. Those are stressors.
They're stressors, yeah.
Big ones.
Yeah.
Big ones.
Yep.
Not right for a while.
Yeah, that's right, they will too.
Yeah, I'm just anxious and not being able to think calmly.
Alright, yep.
Lack of motivation of doing the things that I really like.
Okay, yep, so you may say, yeah.
You're getting anxious and hearing, arguing with myself.
Arguing in your head, yeah, okay.
Just losing it.
Losing it, yeah.
Reacting. Yelling.
Yeah, okay.
I will get my headache.
You'll get it.
Can't stop thinking.
Can't stop thinking, yeah.
I was going to say being more obsessive and obsessing about
Yep,
things.
so trying to keep control and, yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, thinking about the situation and having conversations.
Yeah,
having
so the
conversations.
Yeah, I often think, how am I going to fix them?
Yeah.
But, Carol?
I start forgetting things, just
Yeah.
everything falls out.
Yep,
Indecision about everything and impulsiveness.
yep,
Heart rate goes up, get flushed. Sometimes I like just go to sleep on my bed because I don't want to
okay.
think about
Yeah,
it.
don't want to think about it,
Thump the door or stamp on the foot.
yeah.
A feeling of panic and getting heart palpitations.
Yeah,
Feeling of hopelessness and being trapped.
yeah. See, can you hear that stuff? Yeah. No? No, no?
Probably, yeah, palpitations.
Palpitations.
Unable to find words for sentences.
Okay,
Like
yeah.
loss of
So you start to lose the ability to concentrate. Can you hear that? Yeah. Now, what about if I asked you about 9? At 9, I start to lose faith.
Yeah.
That's what happens to me. If I allow the stress to keep climbing, and normally I'm a person of, very sincere faith, and it's a real gifting for me, but up around there, goes out the window. Just ask Carol.
Is this true? I think just a feeling of just complete overburdened. You
Yeah.
know, just can't cope, got to get out of everything.
Yeah.
That's probably
That's enough for
where I
you?
go.
Yeah, just wondering what's happening to me. Like
Yeah.
just feeling out of control.
Can you hear that? Uncontrolled. What about for you?
Well, 5 and 6 was probably, I like to keep in control of my life,
Yeah.
so losing control. And whining.
Whining, yeah.
I'm such a whiner. I just complain about something.
Do you know what the difference is between whining and problem solving?
One's productive.
Whining goes round and round and round and
Yeah,
round.
it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're in problem solving mode, you're
You
actually
move on to faster.
you're able to look at options, aren't you? Whereas whining just stays locked up. Yeah.
I don't know if I've been up there.
Okay.
9 for me, I don't know, maybe just starting to lack of motivation, exercise is not there,
Yep.
and just getting sick physically,
Yep.
maybe.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Just wanting to completely switch off.
Yeah. Just go away and leave me alone. Well, yep.
I think the anxiety heightens, but then I've learned to use that scripture. Have no anxiety about anything. I'll go around the house shouting that out. Have no anxiety about anything,
Yep.
etc., etc.
It's probably the same with me as well, that bit of that.
Yep.
I get totally overwhelmed and cry, and then feel a lack of a safe place.
Yep.
I'll probably head down the road of faith.
Yep. Okay. Loss of faith. Yes.
Living with the nieces, I've just moved house and I'm waiting for wardrobes and cupboards to be put in.
That's all.
Yeah.
I've just moved house too, and I reckon that's a stressor in itself.
Oh yes, it is.
Especially when you've been in the house for 40 years and you've been set.
Yep.
You've been pushed
So
out.
what would be a sign you're up to 9?
Oh, I reckon fear.
Fear. Okay. Yep.
Insecurity and fear of
Insecurity. Yep.
not everything's going to collapse.
Yep.
All the physical pain that's existing trebles.
Trebles. Yep. Can you hear that? People's ability to manage pain just kind of goes out the window.
Be overwhelmed by everything,
Yep.
burst into tears.
Yep.
Despair.
Despair.
Not knowing what to
So
do.
a sense of hopelessness, despair.
I've taken my anti-anxiety medication.
Yep. And you've gone to sleep.
No,
Yep. No. Peaceful. Okay. Yep. Overwhelmed. Yep. So just topples you. Yep.
Negative and very antisocial.
Very antisocial. Yep.
If I was on my own somewhere, I'd like to just withdraw. But if
Yeah.
there are other people around, like in the house or something, then I'd just work
Okay.
in the garden, scrub the
Yeah.
whatever that doesn't need scrubbing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And it's all part of trying to get control back, by the way. Yeah.
Really struggle with sleeping and often have emotional high
Swings.
swings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and for you?
Oh, it's sort of like going into the caves,
Cave, yeah? Just lock the world out?
Withdrawing if I've already decided that I want to curl up on my bed and sleep or stay there.
Yep, okay, yep.
Yes, withdrawal and wanting the desert island.
The desert island, yes, if only.
Not being able to concentrate on anything, not
Yep.
wanting to do anything.
Yep.
And start throwing things, because I've got the red hair, you know, on the tin.
Okay. And pour a stiff drink, yeah? Sleeplessness, yeah?
Probably do both. I would like manically cleaning, maybe not cleaning, and or withdrawing.
Yeah, okay.
I get rid of something just comes up.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear all that stuff? So I would say you've all been through these in various ways, shapes or forms. And what I'm asking you to do is to be more aware of it. Because we actually help people to be aware of their own stuff when we can talk about our stuff. Now for some of you may think that, that's being weak. Because you think you should have it all together. If you think that, you're always going to be up here. No, you will be. And again, you know, for me, as I talk about this with people and stuff, and it goes on, you know, there are lots of things we can actually do to help ourselves, but it's understanding that this happens to us. And for people who develop that psychosis stuff, they're more prone to stress and the effects of stress, so it can actually climb quicker than probably what we normally would. Does that make sense? So let's just go over the page.
So stress cleaning is an actual thing.
Sorry?
So stress cleaning?
Stress cleaning, yeah, oh yeah. You just said it. Stress cleaning is an actual thing. But it's an indication that you are really stressed, feel like you're losing control, and wanting to get it back.
Can't it be, I thought it could be like OCD and stuff like that.
No, it can be a sign of stress, and that you're trying to get control. And trying to get control back. Well, you're allowed to clean your house.
I'm obsessive about them. I get.
Oh, okay. Well, that may be something else altogether.
Yeah.
When your stress climbs and you're trying to do things to gain control,
Yeah.
then you get prone to doing these kinds of things. It's part of who we are. It's how we're made. And again, beauty of faith. Not designed to do it by ourselves, by the way. That's what this model says. Not designed to do it by ourselves. Because the whole idea of this is recognising this and then being able to find someone to talk with it now. Or having a process to deal with it. So again, I like it because of that. So, and again, I'll actually use this with people. And I'll go through it with them. And again, it starts listing some of the like common warning signs that things are not well. And you've listed most of those. Problems sleeping, tense or restless, anxious or worried, withdrawn or quiet, depressed or unhappy, feeling life is hopeless, irritable or quick-tempered or aggressive, suspicious of others, feeling that others are against you. And that's when you start getting those thoughts about how am I going to answer them, or what would I really like to tell them. You know, problems concentrating, again we've had that. Excited, high, and some people do get a bit elevated and start perhaps going shopping, that kind of stuff. Anyone a stress shopper? We've got a friend who buys stuff and then never puts it on. But she's gone shopping. And that's been her way of trying to manage stress. But she doesn't realise it's one of her stress signs, so it's interesting. Dwelling on past events or preoccupations, other people being irritable or annoyed with you, increased drinking or drug taking, we've all talked about that. Hearing voices, and again, that's a high sign that this person is stressed. That's a very high sign. And again, helping people to be aware of that.
What about hoarding and stuff? Is that like the result of being too stressed, or is that?
That's being so stressed. And not having that ability to stand back and look at it and doing some kind of protective mechanism to try and maintain control or to keep balance, and people hoard. But that's a very high sign that something's not going well. There's some issues that haven't been dealt with. Yeah. Yeah. And wouldn't it be so much better if we dealt with it here?
Yeah.
So I know when I when I'm coming home from work each day, I run a body scan. I run a body scan. So I know if I'm driving like this, I need to start, okay, what's happened today? I grind my teeth. If someone's pissed me off during the day, I grind my teeth. And I realise, gee, I haven't resolved that with that person.
Do you do exercise?
Oh yeah.
That would help.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, it's recognising that this is going on and my body is actually telling me what's going on and I need to pick up on it. Because if I pick up on it early enough, it's easier to deal with. It hasn't got to the point where I'm feeling out of control, helpless, hopeless, despairing, all those kinds of things. So again, it's a very easy process to go with people. It talks about write down any of the signs of stress that you've experienced that aren't on the list. So it starts getting people to write down and think about what some of that stuff is. Over the page on 40, it talks about looking back over the list of what you've just written and tick any signs of stress you've been experiencing in the last week. And again, it's starting to ask people to be aware of what's actually happening, because what you want to do is make your body your friend.
Yes.
And that's how I talk about it with people. You want to make your body your friend. You don't want to fight against it. You want to be aware of what's going on so that you can actually make it a friend to help you to deal with this. Again, it asks people to list stuff. And what I do with people is they'll start listing, this is what's happened to me, and I'll use each one of those to go through that bottom section with people. So again, it's starting to ask people to rate the kind of stress they're experiencing. Starting to think about, is this a 1 or is this a 10? Is this a 5 or is this a 4? It goes over the page on 42. You start thinking about where do these things happen? So it's starting to ask people to link the stress to various situations. So it's actually starting to ask people to do that, to link it to certain situations, and again, starting to help people to think about that. So again, if I'm working with people and they come up to me and I ask them, how are your early warning signs? We start then looking at what was going on that caused this to happen. And I'll say to people, your bodies are smarter than what your heads are. Your bodies pick up stuff quicker than your brain will often. And it's helping us to be able to do that that's really important. But again, helping people to do that. And then I actually help them to develop their thermometer. And again, you'll see that over the page. And it does take a lot of work through this with people. It may take 2 or 3 times to go through this with people. And I'm not going to push it with people, but I'm going to help them to get through it and understand it. It will help them to start developing their thermometer and to start making out those lists of early warning signs. And it's also for me getting them to agree that it's okay for me to actually ask them, how are your warning signs going? What are your early warning signs like today? And for me it helps make a connection with this, not with this. I don't want to make connections with people all the time around this stuff because it's just too hard to deal with.
Just wondering if you should be, are we aiming for 0? I feel in my life I'm always stressed about something, like work tomorrow or whatever.
Yeah.
Are we trying to deal with everything so we're completely stress-free?
Let's get rid of 0.
Right?
How's that?
I'm just wondering where
No,
sort of,
I might be asleep at that happening.
Yeah.
But again, it's also helping people to realise that they will have some stress. And that can be quite normal.
Can you actually turn that bad stress and turn it around into good stress? Or are you just in that sort of state?
We're always going to experience stress. And that's going to be part of our reality. We live with stress on a daily
When
basis.
you're at a 9, though, is it completely out the window, or are you
will
are
be.
you able to somehow turn that into good stress now? Or are you just out the window?
It's out the window for most people, especially when they've got psychosis and stuff
So
running.
you can't like go from a 9 and then it goes down to like a 5.
You might, but you've had some very serious intervention at that stage. Most people that I would work with who've had psychosis, if they're up here, they're in hospital normally.
Yeah.
That's what this model says. If you're up here, you're usually in hospital.
Yeah, there's sort of two things going on though, isn't there? Because there's a stress in your life.
Yeah.
One of the troubles with talking about what the 9 is, or whatever, where are you with stress? People will describe to you the stressors in their life. Well, I've just moved house and the car's not working, okay. So and that's a picture of the stressors in their life.
Yeah.
Whereas what we're really talking about on this side is not just the stressors, but how's your body doing? What are you doing? How are you reacting to it?
A lot of people that I would work with wouldn't be able to relate this with the stressors. No. So you can do that. You've got the ability to say, I'm feeling stressed and I'm feeling stressed because. A lot of people have had psychosis.
Yeah.
Can't put the two
But
together.
how do you deal with that? You say, well, how are you going? And they tell you about all the stressors. Because that's what they
Again,
do.
I would want to go back and I would want to have this model in place. Because if they're talking about all this stuff happening here, it's too far down the track. So again, you're really fortunate. You can put, that my body is stressed and I can put it with the stressors. But for a lot of people that experience this stuff, can't do it. You're asking them to actually do too much. And so it's far better to help them to start doing this. Otherwise you are running
So
to...
for us to be under, let's say, a 9 for ourselves is probably pretty high up on our stress levels.
Yeah.
But to someone who's suffering from psychosis, that's like a 2 or a 3.
For them, they're running really high.
Yeah.
Does that make sense for people? So you are fortunate. You can run the two together.
We've still got insight.
And you've still got insight. But for a lot of people, they have to regain all that stuff. Relearn it all, get it back.
Is that because their brain's been altered, changed?
Again, it's just like it's been tossed up in the air, and the pieces have fallen somewhere, and they're trying to regain and rebuild. Now, it's possible to rebuild and regain, but it takes some strategy to be able to do it there.
But I quite like this being talked about as a warning sign thermometer rather than a stress thermometer, because the stress that puts you into, well, these are the events in my life. And
Yeah,
while it
but
could
for
be useful
you
to
that
talk about
does, but
that,
for people who experience psychosis, it won't. It won't. And you'll need to get the two differences. Carol?
So if when you're starting to do this and people talk about their stressors, the questions really are, how do you feel when those things happen? You help them to kind of put that back into a... Yeah, so when the car won't start, how do you feel? What do you do? Like, do you slam something? Do you get angry? Do you just want to cry? Do you, sort of put it back into how you're feeling so they can get a feel for that body awareness with those stresses?
So again, it's that going on. And what you want to do is get people to be empowered so they can put the two together so they can then do something about it. But again, all the pieces just get thrown up in the air.
I'm just asking out of curiosity, because
Yeah.
I know one relative who's got very severe schizophrenia, as I've mentioned to you. He is totally fixated on his watch the whole time. And he'll show, the first thing he'll show anyway is his watch.
Or go into the process. But again, for people who've had their world chucked up in the air, it may not be a possibility.
So can I just ask, psychosis, is that like a psychotic episode? Is that what? Is that?
Well, it can be, but people live with the effects of it for a period of time.
Yeah. But can it be like the episode would last for a shorter period of time, and then the consequences of that?
The recovery, it's the recovery,
of that.
So the recovery is the issue.
Right.
So people will come in And they may come into hospital, but it's the recovery that takes the time.
Yeah. And during the recovery, they can be going up and down that scale.
They can be going up and down that scale.
Yeah.
Often without realising it or even knowing it.
Can you, if you're suffering from psychosis, can you have a thing where you, so your brain changes, but is there a period where does your brain change along the way, or is it, can you have psychosis with your brain being normal?
It's a chemical.
Yeah.
So every time you get highly stressed, guess what happens? You get chemical changes.
Wow, every time.
Every time.
And they're reversible.
Yes, they're reversible.
Yeah.
And your brain is very adaptive. But it'd be the same for you. Every time you get stressed or highly stressed, you get chemical changes.
Can psychosis stem from childhood trauma? There's so many children and great trauma in the world today.
Yeah.
Is this going to cause a lot more of this?
I'm not sure, but my real sadness is we don't recognise trauma. It's not named for a lot of people, and we don't deal with it well. So again, the fact, you look at the facts for trauma, even in our Australian culture, it's still 1 in 3 women will be sexually abused. 1 in 6 men. Again, there's lots of trauma stuff that we don't name or recognise. And again, we hear it, we've just heard, for those 2 kids and the mum being, murdered. They would have been living with trauma for a long time before that. And yet we're not dealing with it. We don't name it, we don't understand it. And it's too far, by the time people come in with trauma-related stuff, it's way down the track and they've got quite severe problems.
But you can't make anybody go for help, can you?
No, but as a culture, we can start recognising its effect more and more, and starting to name it, and start coming, if I'm not being rude, I think we hide it.
I think you're right.
So why do we do that?
Because we've got the idea, in our culture, we have the idea, we have the idea as family being all important.
And you can't possibly run the risk of revealing anything that's not wonderful.
Well, there's also attachment theory stuff that goes on with that as well. So people are often left with being with an abuser but needing the attachment. So there's all that kind of stuff that goes on as well. But it's my impression that we have family as being here. That there's no kind of responsibility.
So you're saying people who do suffer the trauma and stuff, they blame others and family?
No.
We try and protect them within their family.
They try and protect them within the family.
So you deny it and sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
Pretend it's not there.
But we also do that as a culture.
Do you think also that because we are sort of into power, that they don't want to, people don't want to meet anything negative in their life? It's like, because that diminishes them in the sight of others. It's all about appearances.
It's a whole bunch of stuff, isn't it? But for me, it's one of those sadnesses I have, because I hear lots of story. And a lot of the story is often based around trauma-based stuff. And for me, it would be far better if that wasn't there in the first place, and we had other systems in play.
I didn't realise that bipolar disorder came under that.
Mental health.
Yeah, of this category.
It's a combination.
Okay.
So people can get a combination of both.
Right. Of psychosis with...
Yeah, the bipolar stuff.
Do you have complete faith in the medications?
Do I have complete faith in medication? I was wondering when someone was going to ask me a loaded question like that. I actually think medication's really important. So, for me, medication is another one of the tools that actually helps people be well and stay well. It's not an answer in and of itself. It'd be like me saying, well, you know, marijuana is my answer. You know, that's just as ludicrous as, you know, anything else. But again, for me, it's part of the answer to help people to be well and stay well. And I've had, you know, I've been doing this now for almost 35 years. And it's, you know, it's part of what helps people to be well and stay well. Are there side effects? Yes. We need to help people to manage those and to help them to deal with them. But, Carol?
I was just thinking medication is one of the things that when people get unwell, they forget to take and exacerbates the whole thing.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, and we're all the same. We often get well and we think we don't need it anymore. Who here has taken a course of antibiotics and never completed it? Why do you do that? Because, gee, I'm getting well and I don't need it anymore. Again,
This is
same
why
kind of
we
stuff.
have antibiotic resistant
Yeah,
diseases.
now we're in trouble. So, again, for me, it's one of the tools we have. And that's why I'm giving you lots of tool-based stuff. Because it's not just the medication. Medication is important, but it's also helping people to grieve and do that kind of stuff. It's helping people to understand what's going on for them. It's helping people to have tools like this kind of stuff to help them be able to deal with life. So it's one of those things that's important, but is it the only thing? No. It gets you to a certain point, but then you need other things in your life to be able to do well and be well. Yeah? And again, as Christian people, we often need to be very careful with what we say around that. Because there are a few people I'd like to smack around the head who have told people they shouldn't be on their medication. They stop their medication and they end up back in hospital. And it's not pretty. Because they often come in then with not only being unwell, but then also I failed. Because I haven't got healed, I haven't been made well, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, I meet people who definitely don't agree with medication, and they've got some kind of belief around it. But again, if they give advice to people, they're, you know, I don't think they're doing a good job in doing that. And again, I've got lots of people who've been on medication for years, and it's part of their strategy for being on. I've got one of my chaplains that I've worked with for a number of years who has bipolar. She's quite happy to admit that, by the way. But she's been on lithium for years now, and it's part of her strategy that helps keep her well. Are there side effects to that? Oh yeah. And she has to learn to manage those, she has to have regular blood tests, all that kind of stuff. And she does that, but it's part of her staying well and being well. And the other problem for us in Australia is we're a bit behind the times with some of the drugs we have. And we're not big enough for some of the drug companies, unfortunately. And so we often don't get some of the other drugs they may be using in Europe or in America. And there are some other drugs that, you know, people may find effective for them that are probably not available. So that's one of the other things as well. It's actually way past time.